Okay, so I'm gonna come up here and let's talk through that particular standard. Excuse me. What students had to know to be able to show mastery. Now, what I did on this particular chart to kind of help us think through it, I went ahead and pulled the problems from each of your tri-weekly. So in all, we had 5 problems that students were tested around. And I did that so that we could look at the structure of the problem. I also have with me the item analysis so we can kind of look at the variance in the answers. That'll help us kind of think about, okay, what should they have known to be able to master it versus what they actually put on there. So when you think about EEA 4, equivalent expressions, which is EEA 4, what should they have known in order to show mastery?
Um, they first of all they need to know the distributive property.
Okay. Okay.
But for the standard itself, they also need to know about like terms and how to combine them.
Okay.
Uh,
Let me just ask you this because as I look at the problems, I see this word kind of jumping out.
Equivalent.
How do you how would you rate them or what are your thoughts about them understanding that word? Because as I kind of sifted through all of the problems around EEA 4, this word popped out a whole lot.
Okay. And I'm not completely sure the percentage of them that actually understand what it means to be equivalent,
Okay.
but they do know that the definition of equivalent is to have the same value.
Okay. And so we'll just put that up there as something that they need to know. Not saying that they don't know it, but that's something that they would need to know in order to show mastery. Okay. So these are going to be our reference points as we continue to dig into this particular lesson. Okay. So now we talked about three main things that they need to know: the distributive property, like terms and combining them, and the meaning of the word equivalent. Okay. So let's think about as we look through, and I have with me the student data. Of those 3 things, have you identified the gap? What is it between tri-weekly 1 and tri-weekly 2 that you're saying your kids have not quite mastered that's keeping them from totally mastering? Because between the two, we definitely said that we saw the growth, even in their answer choices. I could tell in tri-weekly 1, everybody was just kind of all over the place. And now in tri-weekly 2, it's even more narrow where it's either this or that. So of those things that you just described there, what is it that you're saying is the gap that's keeping them from total mastery?
Definitely the distributive property. And I say that because they're not, they can do the math. And so when it comes to them attempting to multiply the first term times what's on the outside of the parentheses, they're successful. But then when it comes to the second term, they just write the second term as is. Like the way they saw it is the way they write it. They don't actually do the multiplication part for the term that's outside of the parentheses. So they have to learn or understand rather that the distributive property means that they need to multiply by each term inside of the parentheses.
Right, right. And I'm with you on there as I did your item analysis for those problems that we have listed up there. That was evident in their answer choices. For those students who, like the bulk of students who didn't get it correct, they only distributed the whole number to the first with the variable, the 1st number with the variable, and then they left the second number however it was. So I'm definitely with you on that. That's being the gap that the students are still kind of struggling with the distributive property. So with that being said, we want to look at what our next steps are. What are we going to do about it? We know that 6EEA is one of those major works of your grade. So when we think about what they need to know before they go on to seventh grade, how they're going to be tested, what they're going to be tested on for 10 ready as well, that is one of the major works. So we definitely want to make sure that the students have a solid foundation on it and then they actually have mastered that. So what are your thoughts around excuse me, on your plan? And you kind of briefly talked about it in your data analysis presentation, but talk to me more about your plan to reteach in terms of, are we looking at a total reteach in terms of modeling, or are we thinking that the guided discourse will be more on the lines of what they might need to push them over?
Well, I think that the guided discourse is going to be better because I've already modeled twice, and with modeling twice, um, for the most part, when they're in front of me, they can literally tell me exactly what it is that I'm looking for. But when it
Right.
comes to the independent practice portion, they're missing things. And so if I drill on the actual steps that need to be completed and focus more so on that and allow them to do it and just circulate and pay close attention, little quick fixes, positive feedback, that encouragement, motivation, I think they'll understand it a little more and they'll pick up and it'll become natural.
Okay. Okay. So what we're gonna do next, we're gonna do a quick reteach walkthrough. And so we want to make sure anytime we have to spiral or reteach, we want to make sure that we are drilling down to exactly what the students need, what is the diagnosis, what's wrong, what's keeping them from moving forward, and not necessarily reteaching their whole standard so that they may get confused about what they already knew versus what they didn't know. And so again, with us already identifying the gap with EEA 4, is their ability to successfully navigate that distributive property. We want to focus on next as we decide how that's gonna look. We want to first talk about how did they see it the first time. Let's talk about the terminology that you use and versus what you plan on doing next. So let me go back one sheet. So if we let's look at number 13. This was one on your test. Okay. If we look at this particular problem, I know in your previous data analysis meeting, you kind of talked about teaching them in a stepwise process for how to solve this problem. And so kind of detail that again. Basically, if they have a problem like the one we're looking at now, how did you tell them to go about solving?
Well, first I had them actually circle the number that was outside of the parentheses, and then I would have them to draw an arrow to the first term inside of the parentheses. And then they would also have to draw an arrow from the number outside to the second term inside the parentheses.
Okay.
And that was just for them to identify what it was that they needed to multiply.
Okay.
Then I had them put in parentheses 3 times whatever the first term is. So this is 2x.
Okay. And that's the new setup.
Right.
Okay.
And then you would add that and then another set of parentheses 3 times 4. Oh, wow.
Use my handwriting. And then from there, they simply do the math.
Right.
Okay. So now let's get all the way down and look at it kind of on a micro level so that when you do reteach, we are supporting them around the particular skill that's keeping them from actually mastering it. So as you think about some of your past assignments, your exit tickets, your do nows, what's happening between the identification portion and the setup?
What the students are doing.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the students are disregarding the fact that there are multiple terms inside of the parentheses, and they're
Okay.
just simply doing the multiplication that one time, and then writing the rest of it out as they see it.
Okay. So can we agree that part of the problem, and now this would be huge because it's actually the first thing you ask them to do, would be that identification piece, the circle the number out of the parentheses, draw the arrow. So let's think about how that needs to look a little bit different. And so what is a different way? So you said initially we are circling this number and then drawing an arrow here. What's your plan for, if you've already kind of thought through your reteaching on how that portion needs to look different? How do you plan to kind of showcase that part?
I could separate the terms, so that they can see them as two separate entities.
Okay, I like that. Okay, so now we're looking more at these two being separate. So instead of all of a sudden it's together, we're saying first you're gonna do this so that you get your first one, and then you gotta know that you are now distributing the 3 to 4y. So now it looks like that, and then you're gonna add the 2, or if you prefer them not to add on that step, all they're doing is still identifying,
Right.
and then they go from here to there.
Okay.
What you think?
That makes sense.
Okay. Okay. So what we can do, because we do want to get in a little practice time, I'll model for you my understanding of what you're saying that they're gonna do. I'm also going to put a little team evaluation twist on it, one of our indicators, and this is one that we've kind of talked about before in the past. So I'm gonna scroll down to it. Okay, we want to look at academic feedback. I think with your new idea, your new way that you're going to reintroduce this to the students, coupled with the academic feedback indicator, what I want to draw your attention to is that immediate feedback in the circulation. To make sure that they understand, number one, you're stamping. When you go to the board and you're modeling their understanding, you're stamping exactly, okay, when I circulate, I'm looking for this. You circulate, you look for that, then you're back up. Once you finish, go to the next step. Now I'm going to circulate and I'm looking for this. And I think that's what's going to be a big boost for you as you move them forward, actually having that real time on, okay, where is it that they're actually not getting it? And I think that would have kind of helped you move a little faster between those two cycles, even though you guys did a great job on growth. Just having those stamps in instruction where you are giving them something concrete, you go look to see if they're doing it, and then boom, you're back at the board either moving forward or, going back to what they still don't understand.
Right.
Okay? So we're going to, at this time, as we said, we want to look at guided discourse, which basically means that at this point you want to give them more practice problems, a more opportunity to kind of struggle through those things that they don't understand, while you kind of facilitate and help them through it. So now, okay, we'll keep looking at number 13, since that's the one that we've been kind of working on here. And so I'm going to be you, and you're going to be your students. and we'll do a quick snippet, kind of walk through those two things. Looking at how you talked about reteaching coupled with the academic feedback and those stamps on exactly what you're looking for, and then pushing out to look for those things. Okay, so today, class, we're going to look back at our 6-point EA4, which is expressions. We've been talking about equivalent expressions. So let's look at number 13. And we know that part of the first step is to always write the problem. Sometimes we get the problem wrong the way that we write it, or if we don't write it, we're moving too fast, so we want to make sure that we write the problem. What mathematic term or strategy is connected with equivalent expressions? What have we been talking about connected with this particular expression?
Distributive property.
Okay, and so I would write it out to the side. Okay, we've been talking about distributive property. And when we talk about distributive property, what do we think about? Add, subtract, divide, or multiply?
Multiply.
Okay. All right. And what do we have to multiply? When you look at this particular setup, what am I actually multiplying?
The term on the outside with the terms on the inside.
Okay. Now, what I like about what you just said, you said terms with an S on the inside. Because what I noticed in our last set of problems, some of us are only multiplying times the first term and leaving that term to the side. So we're going to do something a little bit different today from the way that we've been doing it. And I want you to follow along with me. I'm going to demonstrate it up here. I'm going to tell you exactly what I'm looking for. And then I'm going to move around the room to make sure that we're all on the same accord with what we're looking for. So the first thing that you're going to do when we talk about distributing or multiplying the term on the outside, first we're going to look at the first term. And this becomes 3, this parentheses mean multiply, times 2x. Okay? On the second one, you still have to take this 3 and multiply as well. So that becomes 3 times 4y. Now, why is this a positive 4y? Just to throw in a little twist on that to make sure we're getting our positives and negatives. What made this a 4y? A positive 4y?
The plus sign.
Right. So we want to make sure we have that. So now we're going to start distributing out like this so you can see and I can see that we know how to actually pull it out. You know how to do the math, but now I can see that we understand that we're supposed to multiply this 3 times 2x and 3 times 4y. Okay? From there, and then your plus symbol you just bring down. From there, you're going to calculate the numbers here. But before we do that, I want to make sure that we know how to do this portion right here. Okay? So before we solve this one, let's look at number 14. Number 14 says what is equivalent to 7h. Hold on 1 second. Let me flip back. And actually, let's look at number 12 in the other packet. So on number 12 in the other packet, I want you to write the problem because we said that's the first thing that we're going to do. And then I want you to distribute the number outside of the parentheses to the other numbers. So at this time, I'm going to come around and I'm looking for 2 things. I'm looking to see that you wrote the problem exactly how it is on your paper or in the booklet. And then I'm looking for this step right here, the distributive property. How did you distribute the whole number outside of the parentheses with those other two numbers. And so at this point, they gotta show you what they know.
Right.
Even on that, because we're saying that that is the first step. Now, while you're walking around, what are the things that you do to let them know either they're right on the money or they need to come back?
If they need to come back, I just tell them that that's not right. Let's
Okay.
start over. But if they're going in the right direction, they on the money, I just put a check beside it and
Okay.
they keep working.
So let's keep doing that since they already know that setup. So you got it right. We're coming by putting a check. Now you said if they don't have it right, you said they start over. And so what I want you to do when we do this reteach is hone in on exactly what you want them to do.
Okay.
Without telling them. So you might ask them a probing question. Well, have you thought about this or have you thought about that? Well, what if, because you don't want to tell them outright. 9 times out of 10 they know. But saying start over, they don't really have any guidance around what it is I did right or I did wrong. Okay? Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I'm going to switch places with you. And basically, I just want to see you walk through those same steps. How would you do? Remembering that this is a reteach on that particular standard. I just messed that up. On that particular standard, and we have narrowed the gap all the way down to the distributive property, and them multiplying the number outside the parentheses with the number inside, the two terms inside the parentheses. So 2 things that I'm looking for in your demonstration, how are you gonna walk them through and stamp exactly what it is that we're doing different, and then before you start circulating, stamp what it is you're looking for.
Okay. And the first problem we have is all right, good morning, class.
Good morning.
Today, we're going to go back to a topic that we discussed about a week ago. I actually did our analysis over our last tri-weekly, and there's still a little hiccups, but we're gonna get through that today. The first thing I need you to do is write the problem down that I'm writing here on the board. We have 3 multiplied by 2x plus 4y. Now, what do we think about as soon as we see this problem? What is the first thing that you think about doing?
Multiplying.
We're going to multiply. That is absolutely correct. The reason we're multiplying is because we're still working on the distributive property. So, I'm going to write the words multiply and distributive property over to the side. You can do the same on your paper. Remember, if I write it, you write it. Now, exactly what it is that we have, what is it that we have to multiply?
The 3. The 3 with the 2x and the 4y.
Absolutely. We're going to multiply the 3 with the 2x and with the 4y. I love the way you put the and in between it because it actually shows us that we're talking about 2 different entities at this point. So, in order to do that, what I need you to do now is you're going to actually write out what you're doing. You're going to have your 3. This little dot means to multiply if you haven't seen it before. 3 multiplied by 2x. That's going to be the first thing that we're working with. And then you're going to have to show me that you're also multiplying the 3 with the 4y. And what do we do with this little plus sign in the center?
You bring down the plus symbol.
Absolutely. We're going to bring down the plus symbol. That way we have every term here that we also displayed in the first time when we wrote the problem. Now, from this point, all you have to do is do the math. And I know that you know how to do the math. So the only thing I want to see you do at this point is just follow these first two steps. I'm going to come around and I'm going to be looking to see that you, one, you wrote the problem the way you saw it, and two, you actually wrote down the step that you were going to be completing before you could actually do the math. Oh, you
Still recording. I'm just recording you. So
Okay.
at this point, what I'm recording is you circulating. How are
okay.
you? Yes. How are you
Gotcha.
moving around the room, so that they know you're coming, you're giving feedback, and they can keep
Okay.
going.
Well, I can do that.
So now let's pretend like one of the things that we saw was they distributed it to the first term and not the second. So let's pretend like one of the students have done that again. What is some feedback that you might give the students to put them back on the right direction?
Okay.
One individual student as you're circulating.
Okay.
Yeah, as you're circulating, you might come across it because at this point they've seen it enough to where now it should be narrowed down to few students here and there with certain mistakes. So you come across a student as you're circulating who has done 3 times 2x plus 4y. And what is some of the feedback you might stop and give?
Okay, gotcha. Okay, so let's look at this really, really quick. What does it mean to do the distributive property? When we want to distribute something, what exactly is it that we're doing? Hopefully that student is going to say that we're multiplying by all. We're multiplying the term on the outside with all the terms in the inside of the parentheses. Okay, that's absolutely right. That's what's happening. So can you show me here on your paper exactly where you're showing the multiplication between all of the terms here? And hopefully that fixes it.
Right. Because one of the things, as we were, and you can come back over, one of the things that we noticed, remember on Saturday, we were kind of looking at some of their problems. I noticed that either they didn't write the problem and just jumped into solving it, or when they wrote the problem, they were trying to take shortcuts. And so one of the important things about showing your work, especially in math, you can actually see if they show their work, like you just said, if there was a particular student, you ask them to take me back to your setup. That'll instantly tell you whether that student has followed those steps or not. So whatever it is that you stamp them to do, take them right back to that step. Okay, let me see, this is what I did. Now let me see where you did what I did so that I can determine how, how do I support you around that. So definitely keep them, and I could tell with your group on Saturday that they're used to showing their work. They had they had little numbers all over the place. But as I observed them, I could pinpoint immediately. Okay, let's go back to this part. And so with them doing that, you definitely can get back to what the problem is on that. Okay, so good deal. So what we're gonna do next, I'm going to come in on Thursday. I give you a little time to kind of regroup and refine your plan around that. But I'll come in on Thursday during your third period class, and I'm going to be looking for those 2 things that we talked about here. the reteaching portion where we're only focused on the initial setup, and then that immediate feedback piece. Are we giving them a good stamp on exactly what they should be doing? Am I coming to look and giving you some quick feedback before I go back to the board myself? So I'm only gonna be looking for those particular things there. Before we wrap up, can you think of anything that you want me to look at or that we didn't cover? We think we pretty good. Okay, I would agree. I think we have came again. We talked about 6 point EEA 4. We did a total breakdown of EEA 4 so that we can talk about those things that they definitely need to know: the distributed property, the life terms, and combining them, the meaning of equivalent, and we said that the gap that we're looking at now for this reteach is going to be the distributive property. So again, on Thursday when I come in for third period, we'll be looking for the reteaching of the distributive property as it relates to equivalent expressions. And then I want to look at, I'm kind of getting a 2-for-1 because the academic feedback is one that we've talked about from team. So this will be a good opportunity to kind of practice that. How am I stamping things? And then how am I circulating and giving them immediate feedback on that? Okay. And so again, and I brought this so that you could see it, but again, kudos on those numbers because they shot up. And you kind of talked about those groups, and even with them, when you go from here to here, I mean, they all around made some significant gains from one cycle to the next. So you guys did awesome on that. Okay, so we will reconvene on Thursday.